I'm in Shoreditch in London on a Sunday morning, and a week of sunshine has just broken to give us a cooler day and a bit of cloud, but I think some people are a bit glad about that. The pollen count has been really high with tree pollen, and at the open space conference called Devoted and Disgruntled, what are we going to do about theatre and the performing arts, organised by Improbable Theatre, I went to a session on improvisation. I just wanted to record a few reflections. The actual title of the session, and you can read a report of it on the Devoted and Disgruntled website, which I think is devotedanddisgruntled.com. The session actually linked improvisation and therapy, and particularly psychotherapy was in the title. And I'm just reflecting on improvisation and its therapeutic potential and its qualities. And what came up in the session, in fact the beginning statement, which a number of people seem to agree with, was that actually improvisation and psychotherapy are indistinguishable, and in its essence psychotherapy is improvisational, and improvisation has different kinds of psychotherapeutic qualities. But that led to a lot of different conversation, and the group seemed to grow over the hour and a half that took place. So people got interested, people listened in, and that's the nature of an open space conference. And I guess I was revisiting some old ground in that over the many years since, I think I was one of the first people around the Applied Improvisation Network, which has grown into an international movement and a conference and a practice, and you can even, I think, get professional certification, is the potential danger therefore of the therapeutic nature of improvisation, and particularly in relation to some of the outcomes that might be similar that you would find in psychotherapy. Because it's quite easy to be an improviser, and I mean it's easy, you can literally just put a show on and call yourself an improviser, but there are improv groups drawing on the work of people like Spolin and Johnston. And these are kind of books and these are practices that were in the early days of improv, much of which became performative, but quite a bit also became therapeutic in terms of a therapeutic practice. And the nature of improvisation, there are so many groups out there now, it's so kind of competitive that perhaps it's not surprising that people who are trying to be professional improvisers, if you visit their website, you will find along the top, after things like about and events and performances, you'll often find a tab called training, and you might even find one called kind of workshops for businesses. And I guess the therapeutic need that has been there for a long time has been around improvisers who offer services to improve your presentation skills, to improve your confidence, for people who have to kind of stand up and communicate, to improve your ability to flow and speak in public and that kind of stuff. And then it's developed further into people who want to be performers in one way or another, and there are a lot of kind of amateur and community improv groups, and quite often professional improvisers may well have like an academy where you get to do your show, a bit like stand-up comedy training in front of an audience. And for me this initially is all to the good. I mean, it has to be a good thing that people who might be nervous in public speaking, who have to do it, become less nervous and become more confident. That's just one example. And then going further, the kind of therapeutic nature is also that improv can be used by, you might call them organisation development consultants, facilitators, people going into organisations. It might be to help them develop a strategy, it might be able to help them to improve their communication, their team working. And so where in an organisation there are problems, could be cultural difficulties and blockages, improv gets you smiling, it gets you laughing, it gets you flowing, it improves your ability to access and share ideas really quickly. So initially that also seems to be something to the good, that we solve problems, that we address challenges through improv. And the initial view around this session, around improvisation and psychotherapy, are essentially the same thing, terms that are kind of interchangeable, is therefore there is an opportunity but also a danger around this therapeutic quality. And now I introduced a concept called reception, and that's simply the reception of an audience in an improv group, particularly at a community level, is usually warm. And you can get varying levels of quality of performed improv. You might have seen shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway, with whoops of delight from audiences as the improvisers impossibly create scenes and characters in front of you with just a few prompts. And if you go to something like the Edinburgh Fringe, all the Fringe festivals, the comedy circuits, you'll find improv groups all over the place. And perhaps the first, you might initially think, therapeutic outcome is laughter. The danger of that, though, is that if the reason why people are needing to laugh is actually a therapeutic one, that they're depressed, that they're miserable, and laughter is a kind of balm, a soothing balm, a healing kind of medication, the danger of it is it might only be treating the surface symptoms, not going down to deeper causes. And so we can kind of laugh and hide the tears. It can be that we laugh, but it's very, very temporary, and when we get home, perhaps alone, that actually the come down is even greater, and there's no reception there. There may be reception in a warm, friendly audience that gives you an affirmation that you've done well, that your comedy is effective. Now that can be true of performers that are doing improvisation. It can be true actually of audiences too. And I've certainly noticed some of that laughter can be manic, some of that performance can be a kind of mania. It can be something ultimately that gets away from people. And that's evidenced particularly by what I see as the come down. And you might think that if people go to improv groups, that's kind of their business. They need to take responsibility for that. But certainly in a psychotherapeutic process, that's of course usually more than one session, that there's an ability to check in, there's an ability to go to the next session and say things were worse since last time and have further help or input. Some of that therapy can be group therapy, and so that we've got reception that's in a group that's not performative, that can have therapeutic interventions from the training of those therapists, that can have a better outcome than just saying you go home and come down. Equally, it can be, for example, in a group doing improv, that when we talk about coming up with ideas and prompts, that some of those ideas could really touch on sensitive, personal, autobiographical material that is better dealt with in a much more skillful therapeutic way than just jumping on stage and going through stuff where you can be laughing at yourself, kind of laughing at or with others, saying yes and to things that you might in a normal conversation say, well, I'm not ready for this yet. No at the moment. And so that's the danger. The danger is that in itself, kind of inherently, improv and improvisation, and so much of it is comedic, can be thrilling, can be spirit lifting, can be releasing in lots of ways. But the danger is when it gets specific, when it goes a bit deeper, without the ability to say no. And Phelan McDermott, who's one of the people at the session, talked about the importance in the work that they did quite a while ago, that it was important for anybody to be able to say no, to use their 2 feet and to walk away and to be mobile essentially. But again, there's a danger there, particularly when it's performative, is that you feel a peer pressure, that you're letting your fellow performers down if you say no. So that no has to be authentic. People have to have the ability to say, I'm not ready for that. This is too much for me. I'm not comfortable with that. This is affecting me in a way where I want to say, let's stop for the moment. And that can just be happening incidentally and accidentally in what can be felt and seen to be a kind of group pressure for it all to go well, for us not to let down, to get the laughs, particularly when it's quite performative and quite narrow in its approach to performative improv. Now, not all improv is performative, but I've been to groups where there is still a sort of pressure to default to openness, to default to yes and the danger of it is we're simply not prepared for it. And the skills of therapeutic input is the ability of the therapist, on behalf of sometimes the other person, to say, perhaps we should stop now, perhaps we need to go further into this in a different way, perhaps we should change mode, perhaps we should come at this from another direction, or simply be in silence. And I made that point, that there's a danger in sort of noisy, fast-paced improv, that the rewards come from being noisy and fast-paced and not valuing the idea of silence and letting things sink in, particularly if it's in front of an audience. And you can end up with a kind of group norm that silence is a lack of ideas, a lack of the ability to improvise, whereas silence could be absolutely part of the improvisational process. So the danger is that when we say that improvisation and psychotherapy are the same thing, is therefore bad improvisation combined with bad psychotherapy can be dangerous, even mortally. Now, at one level, what came out of the group was then you need to go in with your eyes open. You need to take responsibility for your own behaviour, and that is part of a lot of therapeutic models too, about beginning with ground rules and beginning to get into it with very, very clear, I would call them creative constraints. And creative constraints can be very empowering, knowing what we're not covering here, that we're not going somewhere on stage into deep, sensitive personal material. You can have a ground rule about that. But the danger of it is that we can't know sometimes. We can slip into that material too. And so it feels to me that it's really important as part of improvisation training is that improviser facilitators need to have that training too, that's akin to the skills of a therapist. If the material itself that kind of emerges is going to be one or more kind of levels of therapy, one level being quite a surface, a seemingly safe level, but the other one being that we go deeper, either consciously or accidentally. And the eagerness for particularly beginner improvisers to please might mean that they literally bare their soul to the rest of the group, who eagerly leap on some of their deepest problems and traumas simply as raw material for great improvisation, but that the person who goes home is left with unresolved issues, wounds that have been opened. Now, I don't think we actually reached any firm conclusions. Sorry, that's an ambulance going by there. We didn't reach firm conclusions, but there certainly seem to be some interesting, I'd call them paradoxes. One, which is when improvisers are trying to be less performative, sometimes the improvisation is a lot better. It's a lot more, at one level, entertaining. It can be impactful and powerful. So for me, reception sometimes is about facilitators and the rest of the group also taking responsibility for each other. If they see that the improvisation has had an impact on somebody, to give somebody a break, for someone to go and sit with them, that we also have debrief, that we also have silence, that we also don't go further into something, and maybe at least offering a no on behalf of somebody else. So intuition and instinct, respectful listening are really, really important things. But for me, overall, it's saying no and seeing silence as positive and not negative things.